The first thing I heard was my mother-in-law's voice cutting through the dark. "She's not going to remember everything." That's what the doctor said. "Sign the joint account release tonight." I couldn't open my eyes. My body felt like concrete poured into a mold that wasn't quite mine. But my mind was completely awake, recording every syllable. "Hi. My name is Clara, I'm 31 years old." And the two people standing beside my hospital bed, speaking in hushed tones about my bank accounts, are my husband and his mother. 11 days ago, a drunk driver ran a red light on Meridian Avenue and hit my car at 50 miles per hour. Fractured ribs, a collapsed lung, internal bleeding, and a traumatic brain injury that kept me unconscious for 6 days. When I finally surfaced, I couldn't speak clearly. My words came out tangled. My hands shook when I tried to write. The neurologist said it was temporary. Swelling. Give it time. My husband told the nurses I was confused, that I didn't know what I was saying, that the family would handle everything. What he didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that behind the wedding photo hanging in our home office was a small wall safe. And inside that safe was everything they needed to fear me. I didn't let them know I understood. That was the most important decision I made. My husband, Derek, and I had been married for 4 years. I'd known something was wrong for at least 2 of them. The way money moved. Small amounts at first, a few $100s here, a transfer there, always with an explanation that made just enough sense to dismiss. I work in forensic accounting. I audit corporate fraud for a living. I know how people hide money. I know the patterns. I know the language of financial betrayal better than most people know their own names. So I had started building a record long before that intersection on Meridian Avenue. Not because I was certain, but because I was careful. There's a difference, and that difference saved me. Derek had married me 3 months after his first business failed. I didn't know that until our second anniversary, when I found the bankruptcy filing in a box he'd stored in the garage. He'd told me the business was dissolved by mutual decision. He'd told me a lot of things with that same steady voice, that same easy smile. He was very good at sounding reasonable. His mother was better. She was the one who suggested Derek be added to all of my financial accounts within the first year of our marriage. She called it practical. She called it love. She sat across from me at Sunday dinners and smiled with every tooth she had and said, "Family takes care of family, Clara." I had smiled back and said nothing because I was still learning the architecture of what I had walked into. I added him to one account, a checking account I used for household expenses. Everything else stayed in my name alone. Derek never pushed hard enough to make it a fight. That was his mistake. He assumed I was simply agreeable. He never considered that I was watching him the same way I watched every client whose books crossed my desk quietly, methodically, without tipping my hand. When the accident happened, I had no control over what they did next. But I had prepared for exactly this. The hospital room was private, which meant the conversations happened in low voices just outside the door, or at the foot of my bed when they thought I was too sedated to hear. I learned to breathe slowly. I learned to keep my eyes still beneath my lids. I listened to everything. By the 3rd day, I understood the scope of what they were doing. Derek had gone to our bank with a medical certificate and my power of attorney, a document he'd had me sign 18 months earlier, framed as routine estate planning. What I had not known then, and what he was counting on me not knowing now, was that he'd had a clause added by his own attorney before I signed. A clause that expanded his authority during medical incapacity to include investment accounts, not just bill pay. I had signed it on a Tuesday evening after a long work trip. I had been tired. That was the only time in 4 years I had been careless, and he had been waiting for it. He moved $340,000 out of our joint investment account within 48 hours of my admission. His mother called my workplace and told my office manager that I was unlikely to return in any functional capacity. She used the word cognitive. She said it twice. She contacted my landlord. I owned a rental property on the east side of the city, separate from our home, inherited from my aunt, and represented herself as managing my affairs. She told him I was incapacitated and that the property would need to be sold quickly to cover medical costs. My health insurance, which I had maintained through my own employer for 11 years, had already pre-authorized every expense. There were no outstanding medical costs. She just wanted the property. I lay in that bed with a tube still in my side, and I thought, they have been planning this for longer than I realized. The thought didn't break me. It clarified everything. On the 5th day, a nurse named Patricia adjusted my IV and leaned close and said quietly, "Honey, your speech therapist comes tomorrow. Don't rush it, but the doctor says you're doing better than the chart shows." She said it simply, without drama. She didn't know she was handing me a timeline. That night, when the room was dark and the hallway quiet, I pressed the call button and asked for a pen and paper. My handwriting was unsteady, but my mind was not. I wrote one name and one phone number. My college roommate, Diane, who was now a family law attorney in the same city. I had not called her in 8 months. She would answer anyway. We had that kind of friendship, the kind built on years and honesty rather than frequency. The night nurse looked at the paper, looked at me, and made the call herself without being asked. She handed me the receiver. I could not speak in full sentences yet, but I could say, home office. Wedding photo, wall safe. Code is my aunt's birthday. Get there before he does. Diane understood in the way that only someone who has known you for 15 years can understand, from fragments, from tone, from the silence between the words. She went that same night. Derek was at the hospital. His mother was at her own home 40 minutes away. The house was empty. Diane had a key I had given her 3 years ago and never thought to mention it to Derek, because it had never come up, because I had never needed to explain my friendships to him. Inside the wall safe, she found what I had put there. A USB drive containing 12 months of financial records I had quietly copied and categorized. Screenshots of transfers. A log of dates, amounts, and the account numbers money had moved through. A copy of the power of attorney with a handwritten annotation on the clause I had noticed too late to undo the signing, but not too late to document my objection. A copy of my aunt's original will, leaving me the rental property outright and by name, with a clause specifying that the property could not be transferred by a spouse without my written consent notarized after the date of the will. And a sealed envelope marked, simply, "In case I cannot speak for myself." Inside that envelope was a letter I had written 14 months ago, on a night when I had finished reviewing 1/4 of suspicious transfers and understood clearly that I was in a marriage designed to extract from me. The letter named Derek. It named his mother. It described what I believed they intended. It was dated, notarized, and witnessed by my downstairs neighbor, who is 82 years old and has no patience for dishonesty. Diane photographed everything before she touched a single item. She called a forensic accountant she trusted. She called the county deed office first thing the following morning. My mother-in-law had contacted the deed office, but the transfer had not yet been processed. There was a 72-hour hold on inherited property transfers flagged for third-party representation. We were inside the window. Meanwhile, I was getting better faster than Derek knew. I let my speech remain slow in front of him. I let my eyes stay unfocused when he spoke to me about arrangements and what's best going forward. He patted my hand and used a voice I recognized from the first year of our marriage, the one that was warm on the surface and calculating underneath. I had spent a long time convincing myself I was imagining it. I was not imagining it. He brought his mother on day 8. She sat across from my bed with her handbag on her knee and told me, with genuine tenderness in her voice, that she had found someone wonderful to manage my rental property so I wouldn't have to worry. "A property manager," she said. "Someone trustworthy." I looked at her and blinked slowly. "That's kind," I said. The words came out halting, effortful. She smiled. I noted the time. My phone, which Diane had quietly returned to me via Patricia, was recording from inside my bedside drawer. On day 9, Diane filed a motion to freeze all asset transfers connected to my accounts pending a competency hearing. She filed a separate complaint with the state bar referencing the altered power of attorney clause. She contacted the insurance company and provided documentation that all medical expenses were pre-authorized and covered, directly contradicting Derek's representations to the bank. Derek received the legal notice at 4 40, 7 inches the afternoon. He came to the hospital at 6:15. I was sitting up in bed. My speech therapist had cleared me that morning. Patricia was charting in the corner of the room. I had asked her to stay. Derek stood in the doorway and really looked at me, and I watched him process that something had shifted. He was a smart man. That was always the problem, and ultimately, the solution. He was smart enough to know, in that moment, that I was not the person he had been managing for the past 11 days. "Clara," he said. "You should call your attorney," I said. My voice was steady. "Tonight, not tomorrow." He opened his mouth. "The power of attorney has been flagged," I said. "The bank transfers are frozen. The deed office has been notified about the rental property. And I have 14 months of documentation." I paused. "I want you to understand that I'm not confused." I was never confused. The silence in that room lasted a long time. His mother called him twice while he stood there. He didn't answer. What followed was not dramatic in the way people expect betrayal to resolve. There were no screaming matches. No tearful confrontations in the hospital hallway. There was simply the slow, grinding machinery of legal process, and I had fed it everything it needed. The forensic accountant traced the $340,000 transfer through 2 intermediary accounts before it landed in an LLC registered in Derek's mother's name, an LLC formed 3 weeks before my accident. 3 weeks. They had been waiting for an opportunity, and a drunk driver on Meridian Avenue had given them one. The timing made the intent impossible to argue away. The altered power of attorney clause became the centerpiece of a criminal complaint for fraud. Derek's attorney had drafted it. That attorney was subsequently investigated by the state bar. The rental property transfer was reversed within 10 days of Diane's motion. The deed remained in my name. Derek's attorney offered a settlement. Return of the $340,000, a clean divorce, no further legal action. Derek would not contest the division of marital assets or my claim to the rental property. Diane read me the offer on a Tuesday morning. I was dressed and sitting in a chair by the window. Outside, the city was doing what it always does, moving, indifferent, enormous. Buses and pigeons, and someone walking a very slow dog. "What do you want to do?" Diane asked. "I wanted in writing that his mother is excluded from any future access to my accounts or property in perpetuity," I said. "And I want the full accounting of the LLC disclosed in the divorce record. Publicly." Diane smiled. She made a note. The divorce was finalized 11 weeks after I was discharged. The full accounting of the LLC, the transfers, the timeline, the formation date 3 weeks before my accident was entered into the public court record. Derek's name was attached to it. His mother's name was attached to it. That record does not disappear. The day the judgment was signed, I went back to the rental property for the first time since the accident. My tenant, a quiet woman named Rose, who taught elementary school, had kept the small garden in the front perfectly. She hadn't known anything was wrong. She'd simply kept paying rent into my account and watering the roses by the mailbox. I stood on the sidewalk outside for a while. The late afternoon light was coming in low and orange across the brick. Diane stood beside me. She didn't say anything. I had one more thing to do. I went home to the house Derek and I had shared, which was now mine alone pending the property division, and I walked directly to the home office. The wedding photo was still on the wall. Derek hadn't known about the safe. He had never found it in 4 years of marriage because he had never looked for it. He'd thought he knew every angle of me. He didn't know the most important one, that I do not keep everything visible. I opened the safe. I took out the sealed envelope, the one marked, "In case I cannot speak for myself." I had written it during the worst night of that 14-month period after I'd found the 3rd round of suspicious transfers, after I'd understood the full shape of what was being constructed around me. I had been frightened that night in a way I don't entirely have language for. Not of Derek specifically, but of my own silence. Of the possibility that something might happen before I was ready, and no one would know what I had known. Something had happened before I was ready. And someone had known anyway. I held the envelope for a moment. Then I put it in my bag, not to destroy it. It was going in my office files, where it would stay. Because I have learned more completely than I ever wanted to that preparation is not paranoia. That documentation is not distrust. That the people who tell you you're being excessive are often the ones who benefit most from your disorganization. I locked the safe. I drove to Diane's office and bought her the most expensive dinner the restaurant next door offered. She talked about her garden and her difficult cat and a case she couldn't discuss. I talked about going back to work, about a new apartment I'd looked at near the river, about whether I wanted a dog. I didn't talk about Derek. There was nothing left to say about Derek. What I thought about, later, driving home with the windows down and the city quiet and the air smelling like rain and concrete, was the night nurse who had made a phone call for a woman who could barely hold a pen. I thought about Diane driving across the city in the dark, without asking why. I thought about my aunt, who had written a clause into her will that she never explained to me. She'd simply said, when the will was reviewed after her death, "Clara, your home should be yours, not anyone else's. Yours." She had been specific in a way that had seemed, at the time, slightly excessive. It had not been excessive. What they took from me was real. The weeks of my life spent in that hospital bed, the fear of waking into something I had lost control of, the grotesque intimacy of someone using your incapacity as a business opportunity that was real, and it left a mark, and I am not going to tell you it didn't. But here is what I also know. They had 4 years of proximity to me, and they still did not know the most important things. They did not know about the safe. They did not know about Diane's key. They did not know that I had been documenting quietly for over a year. They did not know that my aunt's will had a clause. They built an entire plan around a version of me that was less prepared than I actually was. They mistook my quietness for vacancy. They mistook my patience for passivity. They looked at a woman who smiled at Sunday dinners and they decided they understood her completely. They were wrong about almost everything. And when I finally spoke clearly, not the halting words I gave them in that hospital room, but clearly, through documents and account records, and a letter written by my own hand 14 months before they thought they had won, there was nothing left to argue. The last thing Derek said to me, through his attorney, was that he hoped I understood he had genuinely believed the transfers were necessary. I sent no reply. Some things don't deserve the dignity of a response. They only deserve the silence of a closed door. Mine is closed.